So the recording has started. We have a document that for an agenda that I'll put in the chat. It should be open to everybody. If there's a problem, please let me know. Just add something in the chat. And I know today we have two agenda items. One's Raphael and the other one is Tom. So Raphael, do you want to start off with your discussion around environments?
Sure. So great. Last time in the backstage community meeting, I proposed to add the concept of environment to the backstage entity model, right? And we had a little discussion. There was some people that agreed, some people that were opposed. But anyway, the outcome of that discussion was to at least open a formal RFE in the backstage community. So that's what I did, and I linked the RFE there. I will invite everyone. I'm going to repeat my argument about having environment here now, but then I will invite everyone to participate to that discussion if you want to upvote it, if you want to downvote it, if you have considerations to add. That's where the official conversation is happening for upstream. I just opened it this morning, so I don't think there is anything yet. So here is my idea. I think that from a developer point of view, if you talk to developers in the way you understand the way they think, and I am a developer originally at heart, so we think in terms of we have teams comprised by developers that are developing applications. Application can be a hierarchy of things, right? You may have multiple layers, so an application may be made of components, and an application can be a domain. Many applications can comprise a business domain. Companies have their own hierarchy there. What Backstage has, I think, is good for now. Where if you look at what they have the concept of domain, which is made of systems. Systems are made of applications, and applications are made of either components of resources. So that model for now, let's not discuss that model. Let's assume it's fine. And then if you talk to developers, the next thing they talk about is that their application is running somewhere, right? And that somewhere is an environment. We call it environment, right? And you cannot model that concept today in Backstage. And I think if we had that concept, we would be able to have to support more use cases from Backstage. For example, I could, when I onboard an application or I create an application, if I can specify the environments that I want this application to run on, then perhaps I can attach an automation to provision those environments from Backstage, right? So Backstage does not really do the provisioning, but Backstage is the system of record of the information that will drive the provisioning automation, right? And that it doesn't simply provision the environment, it could also configure the pipeline. So now I have a pipeline that knows that a certain component has to be deployed to certain environments, which if we don't have a system of record of what the environment should be, that means that we are coding that information in the pipeline probably, right? So, and I think it's also nice for developers to be able to see today they can see that an application or a component, if they is running in some clusters, but they don't really have names for those clusters, right? It's nice to map those the fact that something is running somewhere to the concept of an environment of an SDLC environment, so software delivery lifecycle environment. So, and I think that once we have that entity in the model and we have a way to populate that part of the model, we will have people building plugins, leveraging that, and who knows what else will come. But I think that is really a missing concept. I think developers have a conceptual model of the world they're living in, and environments is part of that, and Backstage doesn't capture it today. And by the way, Backstage doesn't also capture the concept of a release, but that's not the discussion today. So at some point, I think that's also something that we should think about. So here, that's it. That's my argument for extending the model. But and technically speaking, anyone can extend the Backstage model, but that would be only existing in your particular deployment of Backstage. So Backstage already has a way to extend the model. My proposal is to make environments part of the actual upstream, Backstage vanilla. And so what would it be inside the environment entity? Essentially just pointers to the actual environment, right? So if we selfishly, we live in an OpenShift centric world, if we think about OpenShift, it's probably going to be just the cluster and the namespace, right? Because namespaces are our environments. But more, if we want to keep it more general, they're probably, if an environment could be a VPC, an Amazon VPC, an environment could be a Google project. An environment could also span across multiple, different runtime types. So an environment could be a namespace and a Google project. Perhaps I run my workloads in my stateless workload in a namespace, but the stateful workloads perhaps are in as services in a given Google project, right? So I envision, I haven't really modeled the environment yet, entity yet, but I envision that it's going to be just an array of pointers to actual physical runtimes. That's it. That's my proposal.
No, Tom has his hand up.
Okay, Tom, go.
Yeah, I have two maybe philosophical points here. I agree with you that needs to be solved somehow in the upstream, and we face the same problem in Operate First. I was wondering if you know how other maybe commercial solutions are modeling this, or if there's any like a blueprint that you would like to follow, and some ideal case scenario that you would like to see this to model.
So I know that companies that are building IDPs, and not just the UI of IDP, but they're trying to build IDP as a service, like Humanitech, like Configurate, they have the concept of environment. Like, look at their UI. The first thing that they ask you is, what are your environments, right? So I don't know the internals, right? I don't know how they model it, but you can clearly see that it's, like I said, it's some kind of a pointer. Maybe there is some credential behind the scene that are exchanged so that I can actually deploy stuff to that environment. But yeah, so I'm taking inspiration from those UI, but I don't know their actual implementation behind it. But yeah, take a look at Humanitech. Just run their free, examples. You see that you need to, you basically need to tell the system where you want your stuff to be deployed, right? That's the basic concept of an environment. So one day we could even envision that, there are a ton of customers that don't feel comfortable building straight through pipeline. They need human approvals to promote. We can even envision that we will have the promote button in Backstage, right? I think that's one of the final objectives here.
Yeah, thank you. And I forgot the second question, sir. Thank you.
Sure.
Awesome. Anybody else have questions or want to discuss it further? All right.
Just 1 minute. I would. Oh no, go ahead. Go ahead.
I think like for a proper successful RFP, we would need to come up with some ideas, or at least some like sample implementation or experiments in that field that would be like showing the community, upstream community, like this is what we envision this to be in concrete examples, and here you can model it after that. So we should probably work on that part, right, as a next step.
Yeah, I would love to partner with Taras and with him, because he was very vocal about the fact that he sees this problem every time he doesn't backstage. So perhaps we can work with him. Just for transparency, the backstage team had some pushback. The core developers from Spotify. I only really understood one argument, so I'm going to repeat that one. The other ones, I don't know, Tom, you can help me. But the one argument that they made was, we don't want the entities in our catalog to be fast changing. Okay. I think that's a good point. Backstage is not a configuration management tool; is a catalog. But I wasn't proposing to track what exists in an environment. I was just proposing to track the fact that an environment exists, which SDLC environments are essentially static environments, right? So they are not fast changing. So I hope we can find an agreement on that point. Other than that, I didn't really understood the pushback. I'm honest. That's why I'm hope that we're going to see it in writing, and then we can discuss it there.
Yeah, I didn't understand it either, because they are somehow modeling the environments on the front end side, basically saying like you have these UI things that are basically showing you insights into various different environments anyways, so why do you need it? But the actual distinction and not repeating components per environment and whatnot, if you want an isolated view per environment in Backstage, that's clearly missing there. So yeah, I didn't understand it either.
Okay.
Which call did you bring that up on? Was that the catalog sig? Was that what it was? I forget.
Think the
I think it was the catalog
Okay.
sig, yeah.
Okay. And the next one of those is the 21st. Okay. So do you think we'll bring it back up on the 21st or wait to see what happens here with the issue?
I was thinking, let's see if we trigger a discussion here with the issue. If it doesn't start,
Okay.
then I will remind people on the call. Yeah.
Okay.
I would actually suggest the opposite. Let's bring it up on the adoption sig, which is happening in an hour or so, because there you would have more customers facing this particle need, or more users facing this particle need, than maybe the internal team having some thoughts about the database model and whatnot. Because I think the adoption sig is more like user-oriented and more open to listening to user complaints and user issues and those bits. So maybe that's the better forum.
Any objections to that?
That's fine.
Okay. Great. Any other conversation around that, or Tom, do you want to go up with the next topic?
I can go up.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So this is just a point that crossed my mind lately, and we've been circling around it for a bit now. I kind of feel that we are starting to accumulate technical depth from the get-go, from the beginning. And if we can somehow restrict ourselves and make ourselves to behave better, be better custodians to the Janus community, I think it would be nice, either through some ADR process or through some kind of restrictions here and there. What I'm actually talking about right now in Janus organization on GitHub, we have about 4 or 5 different repositories, which essentially are backstage instances. And all of that requires some level of maintenance. All of that is basically repeating a lot of code, a lot of configuration, a lot of CI/CD work, a lot of release automation and whatnot. And if we continue on this path, and for every effort we start a new repository with the same backstage instance, just a slightly different somewhere, I'm not sure how well it scales. And I think we should be cautious about that. And maybe if we can converge those instances into like one or two, would be an ideal case scenario. So we have like the assemble, we have showcase, we have plugins, we have what else is there? The fork for Tecton. We have fork of the upstream backstage code base. So I would like to see this hopefully somehow converged into one or two repositories. What do you think?
I think there's, well, the assemble thing, I'm not sure we can talk about in this call, honestly, because I do think that's more Red Hat specific, but I don't know. But I think there is some desire there to merge that in, because I think the hope, Raphael, maybe you can answer this, but I think that the desire is that they will be working off of our Janus Showcase app going forward once we've got it up and running, right?
I don't know. We haven't had the discussion in full transparency. What we are working right now is finishing up all the in-flight features that we had and attaching our environment to the demo Red Hat system, demo.red.hat system, so that anyone can spin it up in the current state. Okay, and then any alignment work will come later. That's where we are today. I think it's at least that I'm expecting that our instance of Backstage as the plugins that our demo has need for or is supporting, right? I don't know, because I don't know if maybe we can use another instance that your guys are creating, but we will have always this tension that we want to enable a plugin and maybe it's not in that instance, right? So I'm not sure how we want to solve, how we would solve that problem. That's really the problem of Backstage, that every time you do something, it's a new repo, right? Because you customize the build. So I can ask the team to give me the list of the current plugins, and then you can tell me if you already have those on board, configured. Then yes, we can switch. Maybe you could switch to your instance.
Yeah, I would like, in ideal case scenario, I would like to see in the organization to have two repositories, one for the Backstage plugins, where we basically develop all the plugins, and then the Backstage Showcase, where we show that those plugins are installable, plus all the other plugins are configured, consumed, and showed as a demo instance. Why I would like to have two repositories is that, like, if you are developing plugins inside an instance, it's behaving differently compared to when you're publishing an NPM package and consuming it from an instance. So I would like to model that. That's why we should keep those at least two repositories there. What I became concerned today is the fork for the Tecton plugin, which we kind of forked yesterday or so. And if we want to continue that route, that means we need to and maintain our fork and release those Tecton packages as fork packages on NPM and whatnot. We would need to set up yet another release pipeline and whatnot. So that brings some maintenance burden, and I just don't think we should go that route.
Yeah, is Gorkum here? I don't know if Gorkum's on, because I think that was his suggestion. Yesterday we did a a review of what was there. Yeah, Rob, I think you're on, right?
Yep.
Maybe you can take that.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, as Serena said, we did a review of the spike. From what I understood from the review was it was fairly basic. So we were just going to use it as a starting point for our own. I think the intention was that we would develop our own that would provide additional or extra functionality, more advanced functionality than what was there. I do believe that is also one that we plan on working potentially downstream. So I think there was that consideration as well. But I can get Gorkum to weigh in specifically on the issue. I saw your question this morning, Tom, about why we're doing it that way.
I don't know if this is accurate, but for some reason, if I remember him saying that if we did, I don't know if it's true. If we did the fork, it might enable somebody to be able to more easily get our newer version of the plugin rather than us creating a brand new one. But I don't know that he went into detail on that.
Yeah, I don't think that's the case because, for instance, is that you install the plugins from npm, right? So we would need to publish our forked version anyway if we want to get that across to customers.
Mm. So essentially, too, like just so people understand what the plan there was that Lokesh was going to put up a version in our Janus community plugin, which is essentially just the same UI that it has in the upstream version or in that JQuad version. And then I'm not sure if it was Jay or Divianchi, but then they're going to take it from there and evolve the UI to be different and enhanced.
Okay.
But it probably does make sense to have a conversation with Gorkum, whether that be in Slack or something, because he's not here. It would be.
Yeah, definitely. We can move it from to a different conversation then.
Okay. Glad you brought it up, though.
Yeah, I have one more part of this is our Janus backstage build, which we built from the vanilla npx create backstage application, basically a new scaffold being built per each build of this vanilla build. And I think we stumbled upon it in one PR quite some time ago that we wanted to like there's a very big difference between how we build and release images for the backstage showcase and the vanilla build. And yet again, we're creating two different paths to basically achieve the same. So maybe that's also a good candidate for unification somehow.
I think I did the initial vanilla build. My idea was let's find the simplest possible way to keep the build up to date with backstage upstream, because they when they release, you need to go and update stuff, possibly not just the dependencies, but sometimes also the code. So instead of having to deal with that, my idea was let's just recreate the repo every time with the latest and greatest. If there is a better way to do it, I am not opposed to changing.
No, I'm not against that. I think that's a very good way to build a vanilla image. And what my complaint essentially is about is that we have two Docker files to GitHub action pipelines to build it and release it. That's where my complaints is starting from and coming from.
You're right.
Do we need to create an issue to follow up on this, or what do you guys think?
If you find it as a relevant complaint, I would like to get that solved somehow.
Yeah. Go ahead if you can. If we can find a way to do it, because when you start to customize the build with your own changes, right? then the method of doing MP and MPX create doesn't work anymore, I think. So, but if we can find a way to unify the pipeline with some smartness, maybe at the beginning, yes, I'm all for it.
Thank you.
Great.
The other thing is, at some point, I don't know if you guys have had this discussion, but it was always in the back of my mind. We choose a shortcut to build the pipeline, which is, let's put the front end and the back end together in a single image, right? But for large scale deployment of Backstage, that is not the right choice. You should deploy the front end and the back end separately in different pods and let them scale independently. So that means building 2 images, and that's actually the default way you should build Backstage. That's if you read the documentation. I don't know if we have any thoughts around that, how we want to change, what we want to do in the future, but keep that in mind.
This is just an opinion on something that I was kind of talking with Oleg, and I know Oleg and Tom were maybe talking a little bit yesterday. But I think if this is just theory, so I'm wondering if we were to split the front end and back end along with the UI changes that we have in the future, we could make it so there's a way that we can make the changes without a customer needing to throw everything away, I guess. As we move towards the more patternfly, what we see with OpenShift on the front end, there might be a way that we can make it kind of compatible to where, once we get to the full patternfly deployment, that a customer wouldn't have to just start from scratch again. Does that sound reasonable at all, or is that something we're already doing? I just don't know about that yet.
So when you say without the customer having to throw away everything, you mean the fact that with Backstage I've always to rebuild, right? Every customization you have to rebuild from scratch.
I think just plus one in your idea about having the front and back end two different images. Yeah, and then that way it's not a huge dramatic change once we get this to a customer's in a 0.01 to a 0.2 where it's a huge difference.
Okay.
I know this was also something that Christoph had talked about, but I don't think he's on either. So, I mean, this is actually bringing up a good point, because I know there was conversations that we had last week around what were the problem statements and how might we be able to fix some of these in the future. So I don't know if that's, Ryan, I think we had kind of talked about, should we have a dedicated team that people are at least provide awareness that we're having these discussions, and does anybody want to be involved in some of those discussions? So if that's something you are interested in, I think there's, how are we able to make some changes in Backstage in the long term around, in the shorter term, I think around not having to rebuild and redeploy for branding or for adding software templates, and then in the longer term for plugins. So I think there's kind of 2 smaller work streams maybe that we were going to start having. So if people are interested in those, please let us know. And probably the best thing for us to do is create 2 channels in Slack too, I would imagine, to share that info. Ryan, did you have another question?
It was actually the same question, so I was able to jump in on that last one. So that's
Okay.
I'm good.
Okay. Great. Does anybody have any other topics? The only other thing that I wanted to bring up is we had initially had this as a weekly call, but then as we were looking at other communities, we realized that most communities are every other week. So are there any objections to me changing this to start every other week going forward? All right, so I will make that change in the community calendar. Does anybody else have anything that they've done in the last week or two that they just want to share? Any investigations that they've done or things they're looking into or excited about that you want to share with the larger community?
I guess I have one. Well, Tom already knows. I'm sure at least a few other people do. Backstage, they have like a new plugin system for the backend, and it requires a lot less configuration on the user's end. Basically, you go from having to configure like a few different files to now only having to add like a few lines in a single file, like for what you need to add, and then your options. So it's not widely used. It's still like experimental and relatively new, but there's an epic they have for migrating plugins to it, and it seems like that type of pattern long term would probably be best for both us and the upstream community. So I just wanted to share my excitement about it. I don't know if there's anything actionable for us to actually do other than me continue to migrate plugins using it.
That's awesome. One of the things that Christoph, we had talked about this past week was actually having a software template to start a new Backstage plugin. So I wonder if we could have one that's utilizing this new experimental way as well. You know, create a Git repo with some sample code essentially to start that off. I don't know if people
Yeah,
think
we
that's a good
totally could.
idea.
The plugin, the nice thing is that it looks the same overall. It's just how it's configured. So a lot of this stuff can just be moved over. It's just now you have to like explicitly state what the services you're depending on, and then you simply like point your new or I guess it's a plugin. Yeah, you just point the new plugin to like how it can make those services, and then it just does the rest. Magical.
Magic is good.
It's just a different way to instantiate it in the instance. So the plugin code stays the same. And we already use the upstream factories to create new plugins. So there's the basically yarn new command that we have in the Backstage plugins repository that will create all the boilerplate for you for the Janus plugins. And that's already in there prepared for you if you want to start a new plugin. So nothing's changing for that. It's a different way to instantiate it in a Backstage instance. So all the code is basically migrating itself without any changes there. Well, like, did you find it just easier to onboard, or does it offer the same level of control over the plugin, or why is it better from your experience?
That's a good question. My favorite thing about it is that for the end user, they're only concerned with like where the plugin is located in terms of a node package, so just importing it, and then what options to provide it optionally, like if any. And then it just has that separation of concerns that previously wasn't there. Of, you know, you just want to use this thing, you don't care about what it's doing, and then more responsibility is actually placed on the plugin owner to simply instantiate it. And so I think in terms of onboarding for new users that aren't particularly developers, I think it's perfect, and it allows us to potentially create automations for just doing that stuff in the future if we ever decide to go the dynamic route. And then for developers, there's no real significant change. It's just, it makes everybody's lives easier without too much difference.
Right. Would it be hard, because it seems like just encode DSL to instantiate and npm import, would it be hard to create that DSL in the app config YAML or something, so we can basically have dynamic plugins without code editing, but via configuration that way. What do you think?
What is DSL in this instance?
So instead of calling, doing the import in the TS file and calling a factory to instantiate it, you would just name the package in the configuration, and there would be magic instantiating it for you.
I feel like that could be possible. I've never done anything like that in TypeScript, but I know that, I mean, because you have to import something, don't you? But I guess you could have init functions that go ahead and actually do it. So the only problem with that is it needs to be passed to the backend. Like I think it's a class that they create. So they basically write like new backend, and then you go through a list of, or you just, yeah, okay, that makes sense. So then I guess what you could do in that case is, I'm wondering if you could simply have the backend be instantiated somewhere else, and then you would only import the backend, and then wherever you're instantiating the backend from would, oh no, because then it still need to know the package. And then it would, the reference to the new plugin, backend plugin would still need to be passed to the backend object.
Right. Okay. Interesting. Interesting. Maybe we can take that offline. That's a very nice idea to entertain, but I think we're boring the rest of the folks here.
I don't know about that. That stuff is interesting. Don't you all agree?
People are staying on the call. If they were bored, they'd be off.
Exactly. It's a captive audience.
All right. Anything else on that topic you guys want to talk about? Or anything else? All right.
By the way, just a quick for plugins, we have this very cool, very big PR for the topology plugin in review. It's a very cool plugin. I would love to see that in. So if we can get more people to review that, it would be very nice because it's a huge chunk of code. So please feel free to head that way and spend your afternoon on that PR or 2 days or how long it would take.
Yeah, you're the one on there so far, right? I think.
Yes. And I would also welcome a review on the downstream chart that we're trying to rebase on top of the upstream. So that's maybe an interesting topic to talk about. We've been debating for a while what to do with the downstream chart and why there needs to be a downstream chart if there is already an upstream chart, which basically was created by converging this chart and yet another upstream one. So we are trying to build that and rebuild that and basically rebase on top of the new upstream chart with just some extensions to like OpenShift specific functionalities in the long run. So things like maybe OpenShift routes or build configs or whatnot that would allow you to tightly integrate backstage with OpenShift compared to like canonical chart in the upstream. So any reviews on that one would be also very nice of anybody who would be willing to do some reviews.
Do we also want to bring up the one point that I think it was Andrew did, which is around route versus ingress?
Yeah.
Might be nice to get just some input from the team here, what people think.
So just to give you a bit of a context, the upstream chart is already allowing you to create an ingress, which is the Kubernetes native interface, compared to OpenShift specific routes, which we had in our downstream chart, and it's still OpenShift specific supported feature.
But we do want our Janus. Is it true that we want Janus to be more opinionated around OpenShift? And if so, can we provide that option that we allow them to make that choice? I think that's, I would definitely support that choice piece if that's, look like, were you okay with this choice? I think you said yes, right? Allowing to choose is good. I agree that allowing the choice makes sense. I don't know about what other people think.
Would an ingress require an ingress controller?
Ingress is upwards compatible, so you can deploy ingress in OpenShift, and it will just work.
Okay, so by default, you don't need a controller for it.
The OpenShift ingress controller handles that.
Okay. But I'm thinking if someone's running it in queue.
Well, yes. A similar thing you can say about the OpenShift route, right? You would need OpenShift to support that.
Could we have both? Like, could it default? So could it try using routes, and then if that's not possible, to do ingress instead?
I don't think you can do this reconcile in Helm charts, but you can offer both options, basically being there a toggle or like two different Boolean flags, like I want ingress or I want route, or I don't want neither of those, allowing you to choose and make up your mind.
Makes sense. I guess I'm just spoiled to always working with Go operators.
All right. I'm gonna ask Tom if he has anything else, because you have any other ideas to bring up today?
Not anymore.
Not
Sorry.
anymore. No, it's good. It's good. Like, we got 15 more minutes. So if we can still do another topic if anybody has one. I guess one other thing we could say is that we do have a UX designer, Lee Stewart, is going to be redesigning designing janusidp.io, so that our community site will have a new UX design, and then we'll figure out how do we get it implemented. But that's kind of cool. So once he's got some of that available, we'll also share that here. So one more chance. Anybody have another topic? All right. Well, thanks everybody. I will change the meeting invite to every 2 weeks. And thanks for the discussions and for attending. We'll see you guys soon.
Thanks.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Take care.